All right, everyone, now we have to talk about globalism. Really, globalism masquerades as, well, we want everyone to be together, we want everyone to share in the wealth and stuff. And meanwhile, they're exploiting half the third world who still live on a bowl of rice and some cicadas each day. And those cicadas, they're not even artisanal. They're not even biological and organic and farm-raised. Oh, my God. They're not given antibacterial substances injected with them to make them safe. Globalists, basically, what they want is worldwide serfdom, and that's the inevitable end result of the kind of neoliberal globalist policies we've got. So really, globalism is this, and you look at trade deals and you can see exactly how they're working. Look at the TPP. All the liberals thought it was the gold standard of trade deals and then silently edited their opinions during the 2016 election initially. What's the TPP? And this is the gold standard of neoliberal trade deals. Just to be clear, this is what they want for the world. The TPP is basically a U.S. billionaire can go into Vietnam, shove out smaller competitors, carve out a niche, and then put up a box store. A Vietnamese billionaire can do the same thing in California. That's basically the TPP. The TPP is basically the elite of a country selling out literally everybody else out in the country in order to acquire more wealth, to acquire more commercial rights, industrial rights, mining rights, land, and so forth, and also now housing. This is a big one. This event with Blackrock that we're talking about now, with they're buying up homes, paying like 120% value to force everyone else out, and buying up entire communities. The whole goal is to buy up large swaths of land and then price fix them. And do so with taxpayer money. They are essentially getting guaranteed 0% interest loans. Imagine this. If I were to try to seek a loan from a bank, and I said, well, I want $10 million at 0% interest, and I'll pay it back eventually. All I'm going to do is I'm going to buy up properties at more than their actual value, and I'm going to sit on them. And then as the price of goods, because of hyperinflation, which will continue, I think, for years, as the price of goods and so forth skyrockets and demand for those kinds of structures increases, we're just going to price the lower and middle classes out. Doctors will soon be living in two-bedroom homes, and so I'll be able to sell them at a much higher amount. I get the money back, I get another loan, reinvest, pay it off, and rinse and repeat. Maybe I invest in crypto at some point. Why do you think they're attacking crypto? They don't want decentralized currencies. I love it when they attack it saying that it's used for cybercrime, and by the way, it's not actually fully anonymous. But in some stories they say that it is, so that you can, make the excuse that the mafia uses. The mafia is now using computers to hire hitmen because they're really, really smart. Then they want you to live in a pod, basically. We see this, basically they want the whole world to be California. You'll have a small number of haves who still, they live in conditions that right now the average middle classer can afford in small town America. You have the haves there, then you have a kind of haves and they live in a pod, and then you have the have-nots and they're basically serfs, living 5 to a micro apartment, eating bugs. They want steak, they're not going to give it up, but you'll eat bugs. They'll continue to fly. They have private jets, so there's no problem, but they're going to cram you in more people to the plane because then it's more environmentally friendly. To basically make your life as uncomfortable as possible in the hopes of squeezing every last penny out of you. That's essentially what globalism means. It's not about stopping war at this point. It's not about drawing nations together for benevolent purposes. No, it's drawing them together through trade, but it's not going to be useful for you. I love that, what was it? I think it was The Economist a couple of years ago. They said, well, the world economy would expand by, $15 trillion if we just eliminated all borders. Yeah, but who makes that 15 trillion? A bunch of corporations do, and governments. It's not, how much of that share do you think I get? How much of that share do you think you get? Unless you've got like $100 million in the bank, you're not sharing in that wealth. If anything, even your $100 million, unless it's heavily invested in all sorts of infrastructure and shit, and unless you got the ear of a senator to make sure that you can get bailouts and stuff, it's not going to mean anything. It's not going to mean diddly squat. We see this again with Blackrock. If Blackrock makes an oopsie and goes belly up and has to sell out at a low price, that's okay. They get bailed out. They'll still exist. They just restructure and then they go about their business and keep doing the same shady shit that they're doing now in order to try to crush capitalism by creating enormous zones where there's zero competition for housing. That's basically the point. They're using your own taxpayer money to seize property to create, essentially, expanded housing authority style bullshit. to add another layer of misery to people who would otherwise own their own homes. By the way, if you exist under an HOA, you don't own your home. You got a million rules that you got to live under. In fact, in a state with property taxes, technically you don't own your own home. By the way, there are certain states that don't have it. It's bullshit is what it is. They get the filet mignon and you get the cicada burger, and they'll convince you, by the way, that you're happy in so eating that burger. Oh, well, it's free range and organic cicadas, only $10 a pound. You know, you could just go out and grab a handful of them every other year behind your house on some trees and then smash them together and marinate them in some soy sauce and saute them, and you'd have the same thing. But this one's artisanal. It's the Starbucks cicada burger. And by the way, it's going to be funny 15, 20 years from now as more people eat bugs. And, you know, it's kind of a fad thing. Eventually they'll say, well, it's bad for the environment. Oops. Actually, eating bugs was not good in the first place. It's creating more carbon, or there's some emission, there's some environmental, ecological reason why it's actually not a good idea. Man, you should actually be eating more beef because reasons. We're feeding them lemongrass now so that there's 40% less cow fart, says Burger King. By the way, true story. Globalism is moronic. It's an attempt to enslave you. It's a form of soft slavery. What's the difference between slavery 200 years ago and slavery now? Well, you don't have manacles on. Everything else is the same. You can't leave the reservation. How are you supposed to leave it? Most people don't have the economic latitude to move. They can't even move locally. They just can't do it. You know, they rent or something. They want a permanent rental class, too, that has to pay a middleman that can impose more rules. And here's the other point. The government, especially in the U.S., is constrained in what it can do to you. Is a private business constrained in the same way? No. Sadly, we haven't woken up and smelled the coffee and realized that the government is essentially now using private entities, supposedly private entities, despite the fact that it grants them money, gives them loans, gives them differential treatment under tax code, bails them out, influences them, is platformed by them, in the case of Silicon Valley, TV stations and stuff. We haven't woken up to the fact that the government has effectively found a reach around for the Constitution, which is private businesses that you can be compelled to do business with, that are enacting rules that the government, by the way, behind closed doors, fully endorses and in some cases even sponsors, that rob you of your rights. So for instance, Blackrock could say, well, in our properties you can't have a gun. Then there'd have to be a Supreme Court battle. Well, they're a private business. If you don't like it, if you don't like the fact that Blackrock literally bought every house in the town that you live in, if you don't like it, then you can move. Well, I don't have the money to move. Well, then just print more money. See? It's a step towards tyranny. That's exactly what they're trying to do. To be clear, I'm not going to live in a pod, but the thing is, like, the average millennial doesn't have as much mobility as I do. I'm at leisure because of the nature of my work to sort of move around and see what I can see. And, you know, if I live in the middle of the boonies where taxes are cheap and I don't have to compete with Blackrock or something, if I buy a couple acres and put up a cabin, as long as I can get a good Wi-Fi signal, which you can get basically anywhere at this point, at least reasonable and decent, I can still work. Most people have to commute to a 9 to 5. Well, you know, you can't move out to the boonies. You know, you're going to do a 2-hour commute every day? Most people aren't at leisure to do that. What they're trying to do is take all the boomer properties and prevent them from going to the millennials. By the way, you've got a huge problem right now leering up. You've got the boomers that own most of the single-family homes, the condos and stuff. They're the ones that own these things because, you know, they existed back when you could buy something like that with a summer salary for a couple of years. Do you think the millennials that would normally inherit those properties are going to be able to support them? No. They're still literally living at home. A lot of these dudes are jobless. Well, they're not going to be able to afford the home, so they're going to have to sell. And who's going to buy it? Oh, Blackrock. Oh, yeah. Or some comparable company. Not some other millennial that happens to have more money. Like, I might be able to buy in, but I'm certainly not going to be buying like a 5-bedroom home because it'd be ridiculous. People are downsizing. The American dream has effectively been downsized by globalism, by socialistic world policies. And by the way, the centrality with which these economic systems operate is not capitalistic. It is the exact opposite. When the government, the empowered taxpayer-funded institution, has the power to empower third parties to screw the population, it can't be capitalism. It can't be a free market. In a free market, I can compete with Blackrock. In the non-free market, the government throws free money their way. I can't outbid them because they can afford to bid whatever they want, because the whole goal is to crush the capitalistic local economy and take over literally every property. to take over the food manufacturers and stop manufacturing certain kinds of food because they only want the rich to be able to afford it. Basically, it's a dysgenic sort of economic policy that's designed to price you and me out entirely and make us into slaves. The only way you'd own a home, you'd have to have like 3 families living in the same, home. And okay, well, you got a house, you got your acre, but you're all crammed in like sardines. China style. Oh, it's interesting. Everything that we're doing right now, from censorship, aka social credit score 2.0, masking up, living in the pod, or cramming yourself into the apartment, isn't that a lot like how the Chinese live? It's amazing. Oh, and the central investment into supposedly private companies that nonetheless are leaned on by government at all times, including Silicon Valley, that according to Shiva Ayyadurai lawsuit there, allegedly now literally influences the tech firms to try to ban or censor content creators. It's interesting. That's exactly what happens in China. The domestic surveillance, which even continued under Donald Trump, by the way, definitely a blot on his career. It's just like what happens in China. Wow, we're becoming China. Oh, China, but with the facade that we're still free. That's basically the only difference. That's about all. Peace out.